Gina, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you for that introduction. And good morning, everybody. Sorry to not be able to be there in person. It'd be nice to see your smiling faces and nice to see some familiar faces and some new names and faces as well. So let's get started. I'm going to share my screen and we will launch into this. Everybody seeing a picture of a kite here?
Yes, indeed.
Thumbs up?
Yes.
Yes, good. All right, maybe it'll be good to, if you are, make sure you're muted if you are not speaking, just don't wanna have any interruptions. Okay, so let me do a few things on my screen. All right, let's start. I may have shared, okay, here we go, next. All right, so a little bit about ARCI. We are based in Gainesville, and we've been doing research on rare and imperiled birds throughout the Southeast, mostly swallowtail kites within the Southeast, and then in Florida, other endangered and species of special concern. And a lot of these birds are migratory. So we've been working in the Caribbean on magnificent frigate birds and the white crowned pigeons. And then of course the swallowtail kites, they migrate all the way to South America. And we have some partnerships throughout the places that they go as well. And we get our funding from some federal and state agencies, but recently our swallowtail kite work and snail kite work have been supported by small organizations, local bird clubs just like you guys, and Audubon societies and zoos and botanical gardens, and even like neighborhood conservancies, like the Palmetto Bluff Conservancy up in South Carolina. And each of these people have, or each of these groups are interested in birds within their area that maybe they want to track to see what specifically they're doing on the properties within their area. So we've been really happy to have all these wonderful partners to work with over time, and the list keeps getting bigger and bigger. We've learned a lot about swallowtail kites with the use of tracking devices. Here you see an adult swallowtail kite with a satellite transmitter. So that is solar powered. That's the little dark spot you see in the middle of the back. That's actually a solar cell, and it's got an antenna, and it gets very accurate GPS fixes within about 16 to 30 meter accuracy. We get about 15 locations a day in a 24-hour period. So some of those locations at night and the rest of it during the day. So we get a very good picture of what these birds are doing over time. And these satellite transmitters last about 3 to 4 years, but we've had some last as long as 7 years, which has been amazing. So that solar panel is able to recharge the battery inside to communicate with the satellites. And more recently, there's a new technology that uses the cellular telephone tower network. It's called GSM. And those transmitters don't last quite as long, but they're not as expensive either. So with these two technologies, we've been getting a lot of location data of these birds over time. And that is kind of the meat of our research, to know what these birds do throughout their annual cycle. So why do we study swallowtail kites? In Florida, they are not considered endangered or threatened. And in the US, they are not endangered or threatened. However, they are state endangered in South Carolina, threatened in Georgia, and Mississippi and Alabama. So they used to nest all the way up the Mississippi River in 21 different states. And now, and since there's been so much logging and even some persecution and even egg collecting of their nests, their numbers dropped off after the 1940s, and they have not expanded to their former range. So that's why they're, considered a species of concern, because they are not re-nesting into these areas up the Mississippi River. So in the United States, we have the bulk of the population is still in Florida. It's about 2/3 of the US population. And within Georgia and South Carolina, the other states around the Gulf Coast probably have maybe 200 pair per state. Swallowtail kites have tiny little feet compared to other raptors. So check out these little toes, these knobby inner pads in their feet, all designed to grab insects and squishy frogs and anoles, things that would slide out of their fingers, otherwise their talons. So the adult's diet is mostly insects. They find these ephemeral swarms of bugs. They can be anything from dragonflies to beetles or wasps and termites. They find these groups of bugs and go to town and eat as many as they can in these big groups of swarming bugs and swarming birds. They'll all join in together. And the adult's diet is on the move. They eat bugs on and on all day long. But when they're feeding their chicks, it's a lot of energy to bring tiny bugs. So they want to get bigger things like tree frogs, green anoles, and rough green snakes and even nestling baby birds and bats that are roosting under trees. So still their feet are very small, but they'll get those bigger packages to feed the chicks. They are, for a raptor, they're highly social. They, join together for feeding, for migrating, sleeping in their roosts, and even have small kind of colonial nests, which we call a nest neighborhood. And they will come back to nest sites and roost sites and even migratory locations year after year, and return to those places for breeding or roosting. So those places are very important. If you know where nests are now, it's important to try to protect those places, because they, especially if they were successful the year before, they will return to those nest stands, maybe the same trees, but maybe the exact same nest they'll use over and over. And we're finding nests, throughout our area. They are on some public lands, but many nests are on private lands. So this is something we really want to pay attention to and make sure landowners know how to protect their nests, especially these big industrial forestry plots, because there are quite a few nesting swallowtail kites that are using timberlands. So this time of year, the swallowtail kites are back and at nest building like crazy. They get back to their US breeding grounds, and they're ready to make nests and secure that territory and lay eggs as soon as possible. They use a lot of Spanish moss in their nests, as you see here. Remember, their feet are really small, so they can't carry big sticks, which you'd see in a osprey nest or even a red shoulder or red tail hawk nest. The sticks they use are very small and branchy, and they kind of glue it together with Spanish moss. So if you're looking into trees and you're wondering if if it's a swallowtail kite nest, if it doesn't have Spanish moss, it's most likely not going to be a swallowtail kite nest. Now, other birds do use Spanish moss, so that's not a complete indicator. But here's an example of a full nest up in the top of a pine tree. So they like to use trees that we call super emergent, above the canopy. The tallest trees or trees on an edge where the birds can get in and out easily. So as you know, they've got this almost 4-foot wingspan, and to get into tight places and like low into the forest would be really hard for them. They're very graceful, but not getting into those spaces. So they need a kind of a runway to get in and out of the nest, which you can see here. There's some good landing pads and access points to this nest. You can also see all that Spanish moss and then some of the green stuff, which is Usnea lichen, or old man's beard. And they often put that in their nests as well. And it's as the chicks get older, they poop all on the side, which you can see here, unlike an osprey or a red-tailed hawk, that the chicks will actually poop and spray it way off the nest, like shoot it out. These guys don't quite have that ability. So often the sides of the nest gets a little gunky, and the adults keep bringing more Spanish moss and more of that Usnea lichen to cover up the nest. And often the nest from being a bowl becomes a platform, like flat or even domed. So more and more stuff there. And then this could be dangerous if there's big windstorms, because again, they're at the tops of these trees, sometimes skinny little trees. And if there's a big storm with a lot of wind, it could knock an egg or a chick out of the nest, and even sometimes a full nest if it's a big storm. So that's always an issue. But also if there's fire that happens to go through the lower, underneath the canopy of the trees, the nest could be protected, being so high up in the tree as well. We've done some research by accessing the nest. We've put cameras in nests to look at foraging or food provisioning rates for the chicks and identifying prey, and different times of day the chicks are being fed different items. And then we've also tagged the chicks once they're 29 to 32 days old. They're big enough that their bodies are going to be like the full size of an adult, but they have a lot of muscle to put on and feathers, but they're small enough that they wouldn't fledge if you climb up the tree. So we've done some radio tagging of the young at this stage, where we need to climb the trees. And a swallowtail kite would typically lay 1 or 2 eggs. And so this is the normal clutch size. These chicks would be about 28, 29 days, and perfect size for radio tagging. So their bodies are big enough to fit with a harness design that we fit the transmitters on, and they are still too small to want to jump out of the nest if we come to want to radio tag them. And you can see that Usnea lichen, that nice green soft bedding that those little chicks get to sit on. let me back up here and make sure I identify my lovely photographers, especially Max Stone, who's a conservation photographer from Gainesville, Florida. He lives in South Carolina now, but he's doing wonderful conservation work all over the world, really. But fantastic person to work with, very, very cautious, very concerned about his projects. So we are grateful to him to donate his photos for our educational programs like this. I can't go too long without showing a cute little video of our swallowtail kites. So this was part of our food provisioning cameras that we put up in the nest. And these chicks are about 10 days old. They get their black scapular feathers once they're about 14 days. So this is a little video of the adults coming in to feed the chicks. Watch from the left side of the frame here. The adult male is going to come in here and feed the chicks, and then the female is going to come off from the right. Now I say male and female, and I only know that by behavior. You can't tell a male from a female swallowtail kite. The female is a tad bigger, but even like side by side, it's very, very hard to tell. There's really only behavioral clues at the nest site that will indicate a male from a female. All right, so see if you can identify the food that the male is bringing in on the left side. It starts real fast. Coming in. You see that? Going down the throat. It was a green tree frog. And here the female's coming in with a little morsel as well. This is a big tabanid fly, so one of those giant horse flies. This chick's not too sure. Yeah, a little snack there. Now she's looking around the nest to see if the male brought any bigger food items that maybe the chicks were having trouble like getting down their throats. So at this phase, and when the chicks are really little, the adults have to kind of pull the food apart so they can swallow it. But that frog was small enough that they slurped it down. So she leaves, she goes off to find more food and watch the nest from above. Swallowtail kites choose nest areas and ideal foraging places that have some structure. So this is in the Big Cypress National Preserve, and really nice variety of habitats and trees and plants that they can forage along and glean from the treetops. And it includes those emergent trees, either cypress or pines, that they can put their nests in. And so you'd find these nice nest neighborhoods. Well, something that kind of mimics this structure is actually commercial timberland. You know, it has different aged forest components as they clear one area, and they have, you know, trees coming in at different sizes, and also it's irregular edges. And you know, when they're these forests that join the Sustainable Forestry Initiative have stipulations to keep more distance of where they're doing their activities around a wetland or a stream. So they have to buffer these areas to protect the watershed. And there are other things that these forestry folks are doing to improve the habitat for wildlife. So we have been working with timber companies for a very long time. And recently we've joined the American Bird Conservancy and other big forestry companies throughout the Southeast to look at the importance of not just these forests for swallowtail kites, but a lot of species of concern for songbirds and quail and Bachman sparrow and the brown-headed nuthatch as well. So just to show you another picture of how these forests can be good for swallowtail kites. They've got these emergent trees, they've got edge, so access to a variety of layers and different tree types where these the kites can forage. And then suitable nest sites. So we have, once we've identified places where swallowtail kites are within various timber company lands, often the company will take that stand out of sale if it has nesting birds. They can buffer it if they are going to do some harvesting, keep a big area around the nest to protect it, because remember their site fidelity, they'd like to come back to those nest sites. So if it's a good place, they would come back over time. And if it can be removed from the sale, then that's great. And then proactively, we can look at places that are maybe near waterways or swamplands that they wouldn't cut anyways, and they could leave some tall pine trees to create potential nest habitat for future, as those trees grow. They can keep that out of the sale, just even a little corner of a plot that they were going to harvest. So there are things that make timber harvesting compatible for swallowtail kites as well. And something we are looking into is how these edge habitats are, they open up the canopy, they open up big fields for their biggest predator, the great horned owl. So great horned owls will eat adult swallowtail kites. And it's quite a scene after they come in. They often eat the bird right there at the nest, and they'll pull the feathers out, and it's just a big pile of sadness. So I had mentioned that swallowtail kites nest in neighborhoods. So there may be multiple nests close by each other. And if a great horned owl comes in, they eat one swallowtail kite, they could get that search image and then night after night go to each of these nests, and either, they could end up eating the chicks, they could end up eating the adults. And by the end, if as days go on, other birds will abandon being in that area because they feel the threat of this great horned owl that could come and attack them. So they protect themselves and abandon the area. So this is interesting for a few different reasons. Not only are we losing, adult swallowtail kites, but with our telemetry research, we've noted that at night the adult female often is the one to either brood small chicks or be incubating. The males and females take turns doing those things, but at night it's often the female. So the great horned owls are most likely removing the female from the population when they're going through these nest neighborhoods. So that is something we are watching as well. I invite you to check out these two online publications we did with Max Stone's photography and writer Stephen Bedard from the California Academy of Sciences and their biogeographic magazine, which is on the top, a precarious perch. And then Audubon did a simultaneous project with it's the same story within each magazine, which are found online, and but the photos, and there's some videos that are different between these articles. And it's a lot about the nesting story within the Southeast, and great photography, and get a little bit more about our research, especially in Florida. So with our radio tag birds, over time, we've been able to summarize how long these birds are within their cycle throughout their annual cycle. And you can see they spend about 38% of their year in the United States in their breeding area. Most of the time they are on migration. Fall migration, when they're heading south, is much shorter. They take their time. They're pretty much on vacation and getting ready to go to eat their way to South America. And then once they're on their wintering sites in South America, it's about 22% of the time. And then spring migration is fast. They want to get back to those nesting areas as soon as possible. So like I said, we've learned all this through our radio tagging, our GPS location data over time, which started in 1996. So we have years of this fabulous data. And just a little bit about the tagging process. Once a bird is captured, we work it up right there on site. You can see we put a little falconer hood on to calm the bird through the process. And then the transmitter is attached with a tubular Teflon ribbon, which is very, very smooth. It's non-abrasive, and it won't deteriorate over time. So it's very protective, and it's fit exactly to what that bird needs. It's not too snug that it would impair any flight, and it's not too loose that they would get caught in it if it started to wiggle around the body. So there's some flexibility there. Birds are released right there on site within the process takes about 35 to 40 minutes. And then we get out of the area to let the birds get back to their nest duties. What do we get with all this transmitter data? Here's an example of the different color lines and dots are from different birds. Each of the dots is a GPS location, and it's connected in time by the lines. So we look for concentrations of where birds might be hanging out to identify roost sites, to identify common foraging areas. And the points at night, sometimes we get different birds that are using a roost or someplace at night, and those are very interesting to us because we want to locate these pre-migratory roost sites. So swallowtail kites give us a gift. Each year they return to these known roost sites that they go to right after the nesting cycle before they migrate. So this is about a month or a month and a half. Once they're done breeding, they wander around and they get ready for migration. And some of these birds join into these big communal roosts. And we are finding more and more of these places because of our radio tag birds. And since they use these places over and over, we have a system to do these synchronized flights early in the mornings. This happens in July, where we can get in the sky in a plane and loosely circle the birds, not to disturb them, but to be able to take photos of them before they get up for the day. And then we can count all the birds in these pictures. And then we have a really good idea of the population, because birds from throughout Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, even some birds from Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, they're all funneling through Florida. So, and then they're finding these places. So we do this over time, like every 3 days. And we know of 9 different places, 9 to 12 big roosts that have maybe 100 birds to over 1,000 birds. We have 4 roosts that have over 1,000 birds in them. And we take pictures of them, and we look at those numbers over the season. We can identify the peak, when the most birds are coming in and out. And it's really interesting to see how some birds, one individual might spend a month staying in this one roost site. Another bird might stay a week, and some birds bounce between these sites. And some birds spend one night, and then, like, as they're coming south, they might hit one roost a night. And it's really an interesting tool to be able to monitor the national population of swallowtail kites. Now, not every single kite will spend their night in a roost. And some birds are going around the Gulf of Mexico too. So it's not, exact, but it is a really good index of the population. So a couple examples of these birds in these roost sites. They're gathering here to find food together. So they, need to find these ephemeral food sources, insects, where they can just gorge and get fat. So they're so important, these roost sites. And we're worried about, losing some of them because of encroachment by recreators. Some of these places are on rivers and might be disturbed by boating or even photographers. So these are things we are concerned about for the birds' health, and because they are so important for the birds to be there to get ready for migration, because they are up for a huge trip. Look at this. They go 5,000 miles to their wintering site. The first thing they need to do is cross the Gulf of Mexico. And this is very, very treacherous. We've had birds die in this, in crossing the ocean. So they have to be fat and fit and ready to do this. Each color, again, is a different bird that is making their southbound migration. They get to portions of South America. This is Brazil, in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. So southeast of Campo Grande, you can see 7 different colors here. We've got birds from South Carolina, Jacksonville, Tampa, Louisiana, and Miami, all in this same place. They're using the same trees. Now, they kind of wander through their wintering sites. Some birds will spend, spread over 100 miles or so, just kind of wandering between, but they find these roost sites, they find these places. And we, we've got all our eggs in one basket down here. Early in the research, especially swallowtail kite tracking, before I was a member of ARCI, Ken Meyer and Audrey Washburn were doing a lot of work with the ranchers in South America to see what the kites were up to down there. And we see that kites are feeding on these giant termites. That's not life size there, by the way. But you can see those termite mounds in the background, and there's a flighted phase where the termites go out to explore and find new places, and they are winged, and the kites are feeding on that. So this is kind of ideal swallowtail kite habitat in South America. And they're in big groups down there as well. And if I showed you this picture, you might think, wow, that looks like Florida. It's ranch lands, there's winding rivers and swamplands and tracts of forests, and minus the kinds of cows and the palm trees. They look a little different, but it's very similar to what swallowtail kite habitat looks like in Florida, and that's where they're spending their winter. But it is converting to large-scale agriculture. There's soybean and sugarcane in big commodity, and these big ranch lands are being sold to these places to convert to monoculture and use of pesticides that could be affecting the kites. So this is something we want to keep our eye on, is where birds are wintering and what the land conversion is and how that's affecting them. Their migration southbound, which is the orange line, versus northbound, is very similar, except for coming back north, they cut corners starting in Honduras. So if you see here, they cut across the Gulf of Honduras, and then from the Yucatan, I'm going to zoom in here. They wait here on the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula for the right tailwinds, and then they aim north. If they were to aim towards the peninsula, they might fly through and miss it completely. And then they'd be out in the Atlantic. So it's safer to get north and then make their way to their breeding lands from there. But again, this is a very tricky time. We lose birds over the Gulf of Mexico because they run into strong headwinds that would push them. They're so light and they can't power flight like a peregrine falcon. They really have to find the right tailwinds to get themselves safe to shore. So it's a maximum of like 3 nights and days over water that we've seen birds be able to make it. And so think of birds right now. They're doing this as we speak. And this is the spread of the birds we're tracking right now. And one of the birds, Ponchatoulawa, from Louisiana, tagged by our colleague there, is over the Gulf of Mexico as we speak. So think of that bird. Hopefully the tailwinds are good and it's just about to reach shore. I'll zoom in here with our 5 birds that are close to making it to Florida. So a couple by the Andes Mountains in Colombia. We've got a bird in Panama, Honduras, and on the Yucatan, just about ready to cross the water. So a lot of trials and tribulations ahead. It can be a wonderful flight if they've got the right tailwind, but coming into some of these, cold fronts that are pushing hard, strong winds south can really derail their trip north. So these are just the little insights we've been wonderfully alerted to with the use of satellite and GSM tracking with the GPS locations. We've been able to track these birds throughout their annual cycle. I want to switch gears here. I'm sorry, I'm going over here a little bit, but the snail kites in Florida are a very interesting story. So, these are kind of a Cinderella bird because they need specific hydrology, water levels. They eat only snails, these apple snails. There's a lot of exotic snails out there right now, which they are also eating. They do eat some crayfish, but they're so dependent on these apple snails. And they are, you know, seasonally nomadic, and they will go to where the food is. So they will find these marshes and take off and find new places as the water levels change. You know, if there's the water levels low or there's a lot of vegetation, they can't access the snails even if they're there, because they can't see through the vegetation, or the things are too high and they can't get in there. So they move around, and this is for feeding and even nesting. Case in point, the Paynes Prairie Preserve State Park in Gainesville here. If you can see, here's I-75 coming up. And then here, if you're familiar with the Sweetwater wetland, that's right here. But we were able to tag 3 snail kites that are now nesting and flourishing on Paynes Prairie. So it was, oh gosh, like 2017, after Irma, Paynes Prairie flooded like crazy, and there were the exotic snails just took off, and it was the perfect storm to bring in and support snail kites. So one by one, they were starting to just wander and find their way here. And then we had 4 nests in 2018. And then in four snail kite nests, never seen before on the prairie. It was super exciting. And then the following year, there were like 70 nests. So it just became the hot spot of snail kite activity, from being 0 to being one of the most important places for snail kites nesting. And this past year was really good too. And now, however, the water levels are dropping, and it's changing, and the birds are moving. So these birds have to be super adaptive to moving around and finding these food sources and places that are have nesting substrate. So with the 3 birds that we tagged, this is what they did in a year, right? So up here, it's at Paynes Prairie where they were tagged, and then they all took trips south. So this indicates to me that they were all from the south part of the range. So they may have been birds that were born or nested previously, maybe on Okeechobee. But look, they crossed through these hot spots of like jumping between lakes, the Kissimmee chain of lakes, which is a big, important place for nesting snail kites as well. And as of today, the male we tagged is on Lake Okeechobee in the Moonshine Bay area, which is a big snail kite nesting area. One of the females is on private ranch land in Highlands County, and then the first bird we tagged is now on Orange Lake. So she's not even on Paynes Prairie. She's still in Alachua County, but using Orange Lake now. So it'll be really interesting over time to see what these birds do. This is the most northern expansion of snail kites in the US. So it's really, again, this fantastic tool of GPS transmitters allows us to see how much they move and if they continue north, which could be the case. So over time, this is adding to our existing snail kite data. So there are historic nesting areas throughout the Kissimmee chain of lakes, the Everglades system, Lake Okeechobee, which are known hotspots for snail kites to breed. But our data shows that over half of the locations of our tagged birds are not in these historic areas. These birds are moving, they're spending time and even nesting in places out of the broad historic survey areas of snail kites. So they're finding new places, including ditches full of exotic snails. So they're, you know, crossing through these habitats that were previously considered not snail kite habitats, and they're making a go of it because of these exotic snails. They can make these long distance movements, and as we saw with the Payne's prairie birds, they're going to all the hot spots known for snail kites, but they're not necessarily staying there. They're knowing where those places are. They're figuring out, okay, I could come back here if I need to, but you know, some ditch, some canal may have more snails available to them. So why not just stay there and feed? And you know, making these forays and flying all over the state will help them know where to go back to and when the water levels change or the growth and the productivity of the snails change. So we are finding more and more wetlands that are coming on or blinking off because of hydrology levels and the availability of snails. So as long as there are, you know, a good proportion of suitable wetlands that have food and nest substrate for these birds in any one season, they will do okay. You know, we're still, but it's interesting, without having the birds with transmitters on, we don't necessarily know where those are. So this is a good tool to help us find where these birds are settling into, and either just for foraging or as nest areas as well. And you can imagine how much of a management challenge this is. But there's a really great group of scientists from all agencies that are within the snail kite working group, and we're working to figure these things out all together. So hopefully to make sure there are these wetlands for snail kites to feed and nest in over time. So I'm going to wrap up and tell you just a few things you can do to help us help kites and all the birds that we study. I invite you to come to our website. We do track our swallowtail kites as they're coming north. It's exciting. We've got a Facebook page that I will alert to our blog, which is found on our website. And then you can report your sightings. So we just have a new website, and you can see up here the Get Involved tab. And if you click there, you'll find the sightings report form. And you will all, so our website here is arcinst.org. And then also on that, from that site, under the Get Involved tab, is Eyes on Kites, which is a new initiative we're doing for folks that know of or are close to finding swallow-tailed kite nests. So this, like I said, is kind of our gold. We can learn so much with nest site information, and then but you know, we're a very small organization. We can't keep up with all the nests that are being found, and so having citizen scientists like you that can report and monitor nests over time is just a fabulous tool. So I encourage you to check out these few things. And if there's anything you have questions on any sightings, or we can guide you to help us monitor nests from afar. So with that, I'll wrap up here, and I'm happy to take any questions. I'm sure some came through, and please contact me anytime. Here's my information in our website. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Gina. We do have a couple questions we'll get to, but I guess my personal comments are, on the one hand, it's incredible the scientific data that you have available that really wasn't even conceivable 20 years ago, and how
Yeah.
little we thought we knew, but well, we didn't know anything about some of these migratory aspects. On the other extreme, there's something just magical about having a swallowtail kite swooping down through your yard or on the golf course or something like that. I really, especially when I'm out with the golf group or something, and I point it out to people, they just can't believe that these birds are there.
I
They're looking down at
know.
the golf ball, and right over their heads is one of the magnificent swallowtail kites. So we get the best of both worlds here. We get the aesthetic part, and then we get the scientific part as well. So I got a couple questions here. Someone asked, at what age can a swallowtail kite reproduce?
Yeah, it's probably typically their third year. So physically they are able to in their first, but really those first 2 years, once they come back from southbound migration, they are nomadic. They fly around and they kind of figure out where other swallowtail kites are and maybe try to sneak into a territory, but it's most likely their third year that they are able to secure a territory of their own.
How about for the nest sites and the roost sites? Do they use pine trees exclusively, or are they pretty generic about where they want to go?
Um, in Florida, we do find a lot of swallowtail kite nests in pine trees and then cypress, but there'll be an oak and maple and any tree within an area that's you've got the right kind of crotch of branches and is high enough for the birds to sit in. And then roost sites, we do find, I guess they're most likely near water, often in cypress domes, but and they can be in swamps, and we've had them along canals in dying oak trees. So it's kind of all
Well, we
over as
were
well.
really fortunate here, not a roost site, but a few years back we had a watermelon field that was just
Yeah.
infested with bugs, and of course
Yes.
we had even a couple of Mississippi kites mixed in with the swallowtail kites for weeks, really. I think it was a couple of weeks
Yeah.
you could go out. I had a 466. We just, like you said, it's an ephemeral thing, but you just sort of hope that you can experience that once in a while.
Yeah, good.
Another question, you sort of touched on it, but it says, in Brazil, are the main roosting habitats in protected areas?
Most likely not. And they're probably just private property. Yeah, all over the place. And they move around, so it's tricky.
Well, like I said in my notes, you don't worry about the time. If you have anything else you want to add, just feel free. That's why we're here, is to get the information. It's a fabulous presentation. But if nobody else has any questions, okay, we'll wrap it up. There's a whole bunch of thank yous from the group as far as your presentation. I mean,
thank you.
it's
So I
just,
see a question here. Do I tag the birds when I attach a
sorry.
GPS? So I guess when you say tag, we do band the bird in order to put a transmitter or any other auxiliary mark on a bird, you go through the federal bird banding lab. So you get permission, and the weight of the transmitter and all your methods have to be approved. And you have to have special training. So we get all that training for sure. And then you have to describe why you're doing it and all those things. But the first thing first is you do need to use the official US Fish and Wildlife bird band. So yes, each bird has a metal band on them, but you saw how teeny those little swallowtail kite legs are, and they're the exact same color as the band, kind of a silvery gray, and then they've got feathers over. So we wouldn't ever use color bands on a bird, swallowtail kite, because they hardly have legs. They do, of course, but they're very hard to see. So they've got an official ban. So if one showed up dead and it didn't have a transmitter or something, that it just says this bird has been handled. And it's that has a specific ID back to us with our records of where we tagged it.
Well, let me ask you another question. Do you have any other initiatives that you're considering doing or I mean, the snail kites was something new for us here.
Yeah, so another big project we're working. So like I said, the swallowtail kite work, we don't have like a specific project or grant. It's groups or organizations that want us to continue our banding projects. And so we're lucky to get some funding here and there to add to our cohort of birds that we tag. So that is kind of like peripheral, and some of the projects we're actually getting paid to do are a big wading bird project on the Kissimmee River. So, they're doing this really big restoration project where it was channelized from Lake Kissimmee down to Okeechobee, and they're taking out that channel and restoring the floodplain. So it's a big deal. It's been going on for 20 years or longer. And so they want to know, this is South Florida Water Management District, what wading birds are doing within the area of the restoration project. So we've got a big task ahead of us to track white ibis, great egrets, snowy egrets on the floodplain, and see how much they're using the floodplain, the restoration area, and where they're breeding and what they do over a seasonally. So that's my big project now. And in regards to the snail kites, we've been doing snail sampling in the water conservation areas just north of the Everglades. So water conservation area 3A specifically, and we sample for snails. We've got a crew down there as we speak, jumping in the water with this big trap. It's a unit that we have a very specific protocol, and we see how many snails, the distribution and availability of the snails to the snail kites for feeding. So
I
that's
vaguely
another
recall
big-
reading something about snail kites adapting to the different types of exotic snails that are here in terms of their bill shape and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yes. Yep. So they're getting more efficient at being able to handle and extract those giant snails.
A question back to the swallowtail kite. Somebody mentioned, how do you catch the birds to tag them? You mentioned the nesting birds, but do you
Yeah.
ever tag adult birds?
Yes. So yep, the chicks are tagged at the nest, but we have a big mist net, really tall net that we can uh, put up, and we are close to a known nest area. And when the chicks are big enough, we can put this net out and actually use a trained owl. So like we've used a great horned owl that perches on a small perch out there by that net. And as the kites, are flying to and from their nest and they see that predator, they want to get that predator away. So it's the kind of the mobbing idea. So they'll swoop down. They swoop, but they're very, very wimpy and scared of an owl, so they never get close. But they then hopefully swoop into the net, and we're sitting right there in a blind right close by, and we can come out and get the kite out of the net and the owl back in a safe place away from the angry kites, and we tag the bird right there.
Well, there's a lot of artificial plastic owls here in the villages, but I've never heard of a trained owl.
Yeah, we've considered. I'd like to do more with decoy, even like a mounted bird, to see how the kites react.
Another question. Somebody says we've seen swallowtail kites take cedar waxwings. Is that about as big as they can take?
Whew, yeah, that is impressive. It, like, to see them catch something in the air like that would be crazy. Yeah. I've seen them carry, you know, maybe a grackle chick or a mockingbird chick, and that's about the biggest I've seen.
Okay, well, that seems to be about the end of the questions. Thank you again for an excellent presentation. It's just inspirational to know
Good.
everything that's going out in the field to protect our birds, and it's
Yay.
right here in our backyard. I remember 20 years ago, if you wanted to see a snail cut, you had to go down, to Okeechobee or farther south.
Yeah.
And now
Yeah.
you can go north and see them. Who would have thought, huh? As they say. All right. Well, thank you very much, Gina, and thank everybody for attending. And again, our next meeting is coming up in April, and we'll be seeing you there. Don't forget about our picnic next Saturday.